Hello, everybody, and welcome back to No Frills, Just Facts, the series where I try to explain guitar-based concepts in under 5 minutes. Let's get into it. Today we're going to talk about overdrive, and usually when we talk about overdrive, we're speaking specifically of overdrive pedals like these. There are a lot of common overdrive pedals, but in order to understand what overdrive is, we have to go back to where overdrive came from. Overdrive originally came from amplifiers, specifically tube amplifiers. For those of you who don't know, amps back in the day were powered by vacuum tubes. And for all intents and purposes, when it comes to amplifiers, these vacuum tubes are responsible for amplifying your guitar's signal. Think about it. When you play an electric guitar, it's very, very quiet. So how does an amplifier take that signal that's very quiet and turn it into something that can rock a stadium? Tube amps are still in use today and are highly sought after, but we also have the addition of solid state amps, but that's a discussion for another time. The way an amp works is it has a preamp and a power amp stage, and these stages are responsible for taking your guitar's signal and boosting it and making it loud enough so that it can be heard through a speaker and therefore through the amplifier. Now, amplifiers have a volume knob, obviously, and when you turn that volume knob, what it does is it actually increases the amount of signal that gets pushed through those tubes. Tubes have this little design flaw, one might call it, where once your signal gets into it, it hits a threshold where it can no longer really be boosted past that point. And once it hits that point, it actually clips the signal. And that's where we get the sound of overdrive. You are overdriving the tubes and it starts to distort. However, we discovered that when you crank it up really loud and you get that distortion, it's actually really, really pleasant. That's what all of these pedals are trying to emulate, is that overdriven clipping sound. In my last episode of this series, I talked about compression and how compression and overdrive have a very similar function, wherein they take quiet notes and make them louder, and they take loud notes and kind of make them softer. However, when you overdrive a note and you pluck it really hard, what it does is it actually saturates it. Here's what a typical audio signal looks like. Here's what it looks like when it is compressed. You can actually see that the peaks and valleys did not get any taller, but instead they widened. We're starting to get more of the signal is getting closer to the top. This is what overdrive looks like, where it gets to the threshold and it gets clipped, it gets cut off. Now, there are two main types of overdrive that we talk about and we hear people talk about, these buzzwords that are soft clipping overdrive and hard clipping overdrive. All it really refers to is how aggressive is the clipping. The clipping that I showed in my diagram is more of a hard clipping overdrive, wherein we have almost like a right angle of where it's being clipped. These are really aggressive overdrives. Here you can see a diagram that shows kind of how each one looks. While we can listen and kind of guess what hard clipping or soft clipping sounds like, it's really a classification that is done by the builder. There are also two other buzzwords that we hear, and that is transparent and non-transparent overdrives. This essentially means that there are some overdrives that will color our tone, i.e. change the EQ of it. The transparent overdrives are ones where it just adds grit to it and doesn't actually color the EQ or the tone of your guitar. They both have their pros and cons. Now, within these realms of hard clipping and soft clipping, there are four fairly popular styles of pedals that we need to talk about. The first one being the tube screamer. This is a soft clipping style pedal, and it is probably one of the most popular pedals out there. There's a lot of people who love it, a lot of people who hate it. It's a sound that's very well founded in rock and roll and blues alike. Now, there are probably as many clones of this pedal as there is salt in the ocean, but the original still remains very popular today and is what most people think of when they think of a tube screamer style pedal. That being said, my personal favorite is the classic Overdrive by MXR. The next soft clipping style of pedal that we have is called a blues breaker. It was initially done by Marshall, and it is distinctively different from the tube screamer in that it is a transparent overdrive. Now, while the original is that Marshall blues breaker, probably the most popular version or most well-known version that we hear about is the King of Tone by Analog Man. My personal favorite is the Morning Glory by JHS. Next, we get into hard clipping, and this is where we get into what a lot of people would call distortion. There are a ton of different variations of this. Probably my favorite of the classic hard clipping sound is the Rat by Proco. These pedals have way more in them than you think they do. A lot of people view them as, it's a distortion pedal, it's heavy, it's loud, it doesn't really have a place in my board. I would say get one because number one, they're pretty cheap. And number two, you never know what you're going to find in it. And I've found that there's quite a bit of range and tone from the Rats. The last pedal that we need to talk about that's pretty popular, and it's kind of the new kid on the block, as well as it is considered a hard clipping overdrive. This is a pedal that, forgive the crassness, has a lot of the guitar community by the gonads. They go for as much as $9,000 on Reverb, which is kind of ridiculous in my mind. Just about every pedal company that exists has made a clone at some point. My personal favorite is I'm kind of stuck between the Wampler Tumnus and the Golden Horse by some obscure Amazon brand. Both sound great. I've tried them both, and honestly, the $40 one from Amazon is pretty good. Let me also be very clear that I am not opposed to the Klon Centaur. I think it's a great pedal. I have a Klon clone on my board. I am not opposed to them by any means. I'm opposed to paying $9,000 for one. All right, thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of No Frills, Just Facts. Once again, my name is Mac Wright. Please like and subscribe. Go make someone else's day better. And of course, we'll see you around.